Hello, my name is Brother Richard Merling. I'm the director of the Father Solanus Guild and the vice postulator for the cause of Father Solanus. And my family has a history with the Casey family, and it goes back to the fact that my grandfather and his brothers had boarded at the Casey family home in Superior, Wisconsin, back in the early 1890s. And my one uncle ends up marrying Solanus' oldest sister. And so there has been a relationship there. And often heard about Father Solanus, stories about him from early on. And I remember then back in probably about 1948 or so, my grandfather came over to visit us, and he came down to the monastery to visit Father Solanus. And of course, that's something that had stayed in my mind because of the fact that there were always great stories that we were hearing about Father Solanus. And then there was an incident later on in 1956, in December of that year. I have an older brother that was in a serious auto accident and severely injured his leg to the point to where they were going to amputate it. And my mother said, let's go down and see Father Solanus. So we came down here to see Father Solanus, and it was quite an experience insofar as being able to remember some of the visit with him. First of all, we told him about my brother's incident of injuring his leg, and they were going to amputate it. And he said, oh, don't worry, things are going to be all right. And he went on and talked about other things in his life and so forth, and some of the things that he did as a young man, and knowing my grandfather and so forth, and uncles. And he ends up saying, he said, when I was a youngster, he says, I used to play a fiddle at barn dances. And he said, I just restrung a violin this morning. He says, I'd like to play it for you. So he went off to his room and brought this violin back with him and played several tunes. And we thought it was delightful, really, and after he finished, we really appreciated it and thanked him for it and so forth. And with great pride later on, of course, when I became a Capuchin and told some of the other brothers about hearing Father Solanus play his violin, they kind of said, yeah, and so did we. It was a little bit on a hard side to listen to him. But then Brother Leo, after I told Brother Leo that, he says, oh yeah, he says the brethren really weren't too excited about his violin playing. And he said that Father Solanus realized that too at times. He thought he was going to entertain them at the recreation room, and they would go and turn the radio on or the Victrola, put a record on or something so they wouldn't have to listen to him. And he would just smile and take his violin and walk off and head into chapel. And he would stand before a statue and play his violin. And as then some of the friars would say, well, yeah, they knew that the statue wasn't going to take off on him. He had a captive audience. But anyways, he enjoyed that. And then he talked about other things in his early years and things that he did. And then he said, when I entered the order as a Capuchin, he says, I didn't get to see my mother for 8 years. Of course, me, I had no idea and thought or anything else, and about it, and didn't think too much of it. And my mother thought, oh, is that terrible, not seeing your mother for 8 years, or her not seeing you. And so when we were ready to leave, he said, would you like a blessing? And we said, yes. And so we all knelt down. And he had the relic of the true cross, which he would carry with him all the time. And just by on the side, that's the relic that we use so frequently for the blessings of the sick. and at the actual service on Wednesday afternoons. And so anyways, he pulled this relic out of a little pocket that we have inside the bib here, and he took it and he blessed all of us. And when he came to me, he blessed me and he put his hand on my shoulder. My mother's heart sunk. She says, my God, he has him for the monastery. I won't see him for 8 years. She didn't say a word to me about it, but some probably 7, 8 years later, I ended up coming down here and inquiring about joining the order. And I went home and I told my mother, and my mother didn't say a word to me, but she went to my sister and said, you know, I was fearful of this. We won't see him for 8 years. But of course, things had changed in those days. We had cars to move around in, and if you were 300 or 400 miles away, you were able to see someone, you know, within a day's time. Whereby in Solanus's day, they traveled by horse and buggy, basically, and he was 1,000 miles away from home. So you can see why he wouldn't have seen his mother for that length of time. But anyway, so it had changed for me, and she was much more content with the idea that she was able to see me in a few months. What I was going to mention as well is that prior to my entering into the Capuchin order, we were on vacation in July of 1957 when Solanus died. And we read it in the paper. And so as soon as my mother read it, she says, we're going home. So we left our vacation and came home to attend the funeral of Father Solanus. And of course, it was rather a memorial type of thing, or at least for myself, it was very memorable, I guess is what I wanted to say, insofar as we came the night before for the wake service, and we had to park blocks away from here because of the traffic, the cars that were around. And then when we got up to the church, we had a long wait in line before we were able to get into the church and come up by the casket to see the body. So it was quite a memorable event, his funeral. And of course, as they say, that there were thousands of people that came here. And it was certainly a full house, they said, for the funeral itself. Well, over the years, it's been 40-some years now that I've been working with the cause of Father Solanus, basically as the director for the Father Solanus Guild. And the Guild has been the group of people who have been promoting his cause for canonization, and over the years they've been extremely supportive of it. And of course, I've worked alongside with Brother Leo, who had been the vice postulator for the cause, and then when he passed away some 4 years ago, I was asked to then take on that position along with Father Larry Weber at that point. And so the two of us have been working closely with that. And of course, we've had the opportunity through the years to hear many wonderful stories about Father Solanus and how he has touched the lives of so many people. And people who were kind of losing hope in various situations in their life. And they came here to Solanus and asking for his prayers for help. And how they said as they walked out the door, things would change for them. And so there has been many wonderful stories. And I know that there's been a few stories that have been related to me through Brother Leo, how when Father Solanus was the doorkeeper, the man that sat at the desk out at the front office, and Brother Leo was his helper, and Brother Leo said he had witnessed many wonderful things that would take place. One was of a young family came in with their child who was about 6 years of age, and the father was carrying the young boy, and they went over and sat on the chairs, waited their time to come, and when the time came for them to get up and see Father Solanus, just the mother came, and she came up to the desk. And she sat down and she began to tell Father Solanus about her son, how he hasn't been able to walk since birth and so forth. And Father Solanus very politely listened to her. And when she finished her talk to him, he looked over at the little boy and said, "Come here, little boy." And she was stunned, and she said, "Father, I told you he doesn't walk." He said, "Come here, little boy." And the child got off the father's lap. Came over to him. So there's, probably a number of emotional stories that I could tell, and so far that Leo had witnessed. And it was just another young couple had come in to the office door, and they were heading over to sit down, and Father Solanas had just finished with someone, and he said, got their attention, and he said, "Come here." And he said, "Oh, you can go to the hospital. Your father's all right. You'll be okay." So there were just wonderful stories that have been told, and people have shared with me through the years. But like that, I'll be honest, I don't remember them all, And again, you just kind of would simply say and think, yeah, this is Father Solanas. This is what happened to him in so many different ways with his visitors, And other times he really he told this one family that came in that the husband was sick in the hospital, and he told the wife, he says, "Well, your husband will have a peaceful death." And she was taken back by that. And she says, "Father," she says, "Oh, well, actually what it was to the fact that he had gotten her, when she told him that her husband was seriously ill, she says, if I were to call him and put him on the phone, would you talk to him?" And he said, "Yes." And then as he spoke with the man, he said, "You'll have a very peaceful death." And she was like just totally taken back with that. So she said, "I went to the hospital to visit him, and my husband was just at such great peace." And she says, "It was just unbelievable. It was just accepting of it." And she said, from that time on, she says, "I used to come to Father Solanas for everything that I needed to have taken care of." She said he just, he had a sense of being able to give peace and take care of things the way they should be. Other than hearing many stories from people, being the director with the Father Solanas Guild, there have been literally thousands of people that have come to our office to speak to us about how Father Solanas has touched them in their lives in some way or another. And it's just wonderful stories, one after another, And you can kind of see, well, this man truly was a saint while he was alive, and certainly is a saint now. And that he brought great peace and happiness to people in their lives. And like I had said earlier, perhaps not always were they very happy insofar as what you were expecting or hoping for, but he was able to give people a sense of peace and an acceptance to what was there in their lives.
Wonderful.
Years since Father Solanas' death, we've had tremendous reports of people as well, saying that they've had healings and so forth, and how they come to the tomb here of Solanas and are praying there, and sometimes they feel immediate relief, and other times they don't. And I know there was an incident of a young child that was about 6 months old that was brought here on a weekend and on a Saturday afternoon, and she was a twin. And the one, of course, was very sick. It had some kind of muscular disease, and wasn't able to move its arms or anything. And so they brought her to the tomb here and laid her on the tomb and asked if I would say some prayers to bless the child. And as I was praying, the child began to move, and they were just excited, and they picked up the baby and they practically ran home. They were just totally amazed that something like that would happen. And like I say, she was a twin, and the twin was perfectly all right, but this one child was not. And from that time on, the child had been good. So, and they took her back to the doctor, and the doctor was not of the Catholic faith or of Christianity, and they asked for a report from her, from the doctor, and she would not give it. She just refused. And it just wasn't of her belief that such a thing would happen. And so she refused. But the parents were just elated, and they've been back several times since with the child. The child must be at least 15, 16 years of age now. But, yeah, so there's just wonderful stories like that that are told around the tomb of Solanus today, and how you can see, in the future that his legacy will continue to live on because of the things that are constantly happening on a daily basis. Blessings.